Well, welcome back to another episode of Driven by Cause. This episode is brought to you by Ariba, the thought leaders behind the industry's only completely integrated and fully automated all-in-one digital fundraising, donor relationship management database, healthcare hospitality, and auction software in one unified database. I'm joined by my awesome co-host today, which I'm personally excited about, is Chris Fink. Chris, how are you today?
I'm better now. Thanks, David, for that compliment. You're awesome as well. And we have two awesome, even more awesome guests, which I'm super excited about today.
Well, Chris, I couldn't agree with you more. Today is going to be another great episode because we have a very special guest. Today's guest is someone who truly has reshaped the global landscape of generosity, and I'm thrilled to welcome Brian Williams and CF Callahan. Brian Williams is the founder and president of Dandelion Consulting, where he partners with nonprofits, especially in the arts and LGBTQ sectors, to strengthen and fundraise strategies and build more engaged donor communities, which is really great. With more than 20 years of experience, Brian has led fundraising teams, served as executive director, and helped organizations grow giving, re-engage donors, and build sustainable support. He's known for his collaborative approach, his ability to help organizations turn passionate supporters, which is great, into long-term advocates. CF Calhoun is the founder and principal of Heart Strategy Impact, bringing over a decade of experience in nonprofit fundraising, strategy, and leadership. He has helped organizations raise more than 25 million across annual funds, campaigns, and special initiatives. CF works closely with nonprofit leaders to develop clear, actionable strategies that strengthen donor relationships, improve operations, and drive long-term growth, all with a focus on helping teams raise more and stress less. That's pretty amazing. Thank you both for being here today.
Thanks, David. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, excited to be here. Thank you both.
Well, we're happy you could be here with us today. So, can each of you share with our listeners some information about yourself and how you got started in the nonprofit industry? And either one can go first. We don't care.
Do you want me to go CF?
Go for it, Brian. Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, so my background actually started in the arts, and I thought I was gonna make it as a successful actor, but alas, money and art never came together for me. So I kind of stumbled my way into the nonprofit sector where I'd been for about 20 years. And just like the reports that you see out there, the last 10 years of my work in the nonprofit sector, I was hopping jobs every 2 years because burnout and turnover and just exhausted. And that sort of led me to Dandelion Consulting, and because I wanted to be, I guess I would say, trying to figure out how can I be a part of the solution rather than the problem. And so oftentimes I talk a lot about this idea of a culture of philanthropy. I'm a huge advocate for building your champions up to be, help you increase your culture of philanthropy for your organization. So that's a little bit about me, CF.
Well, mine was a little more unconventional. It started with dressing up as a docent in 19th century clothing for a historic mansion in my hometown. That was my first taste of volunteering. And then I went to college and worked at the Visitors Bureau, and I realized that there were all these cultural organizations that you could get a job at those places. And I didn't know that you could work in the nonprofit sector. And really that was what took me to continuing to volunteer, work at mental health agencies, at universities, at a ballet company. And so all of those skills combined led me to start my own business, Her Strategy Impact, so that I can help nonprofits raise more and stress less.
Off with the questions. Brian and CF, you you both co-authored a report, right, titled Beyond the
Mhm.
Pride Flag, Understanding the Complex Dynamics of the LGBTQ plus philanthropic community. Number one, yeah, if anyone wants to out there, any of our listeners want to read that, I saw that it's on the FP Global website, right? It's gated, but you can get to it. Is there anywhere else where people can access that and read it?
Yeah, is it on the website, CF. I can't remember what the name of that, but
And is it on your website as well, or is it just on, I noticed on the AFP website. I just want to make sure if people want to read it, they have access to it or know how to get to it.
Yeah, it's on my website, and then Brian and I
Okay,
created
awesome.
another website called the Community Fundraising Collaborative, and so we can drop those details in.
Awesome.
yeah.
They're both
Okay,
available there for free, not gatekeeped. Yeah.
excellent. Okay, great. And then I just wanted to just, from a high level, what what inspired you to write this report, and what
Yeah.
were you trying to accomplish? What were your goals by conducting the research and writing the report?
Yeah, CF and I actually met when we were a part of an affinity call, the LGBTQ group affinity call for AFP, about 2.5, 3 years ago. And we just kind of hit it off. And so we got to talking about CF. Actually, it was his brilliant idea. It's like, hey, why don't we try to think about a proposal for AFP? And so we started brainstorming and realizing that we met in the LGBTQ plus affinity group call, we started talking about, you know, is there any data out there about how nonprofits are engaging that community, our community? And we really hadn't seen a lot of in-depth data around that. And so that sort of drove the conversation and drove the purpose of the report is we wanted to sort of uncover information around that, how are nonprofits engaging or not engaging that community, and then share that to a larger audience and talk about, here's where we are today. Here are some of the best practices that you might think about when you are engaging that community. So that's really how it got started.
Gotcha.
That's great.
Okay.
Your report traces the
It's a lot
LGBTQ.
of letters, David. You got it. Just slow
You know,
down.
I got to be honest with you. I started with my ABCs and I kind of got messed up after that. But all kidding aside, and thanks. The report traces the philanthropic from activism and mutual aid through HIV/AIDS crisis to today, which is really pretty amazing in its own right. But how has that history shaped the way the LGBTQ donors think about trust, community, and really institutional engagement?
Thanks for the question, David. When I think about that, I go back to kind of like where did philanthropy come from? And philanthropy came out of, I believe, the work of Alexis de Tocqueville the early 19th century, where he recognized that communities came together to support each other. And you talk about the AIDS crisis, the only folks who were supporting individuals experiencing that disease were the communities that they were a part of. And in so many ways throughout history, community in Tocqueville's day were the folks that were down the street that wanted to solve a problem in their community. And community has shifted from maybe your next door neighbor to those who share similar characteristics, whether you're Black, whether you're LGBTQ, whether you have different abilities. We're coalescing in different ways. And so I think at the end of the day, when we think about philanthropy, it's about coming together in a community of peers, trying to solve a problem that other people may not believe is that big a deal. And so when I think about the LGBT community and all of the struggles that they have dealt with since the 1960s and the struggle for civil rights and the AIDS crisis and don't ask, don't tell and gay marriage, it was up to us to make that happen. And luckily, there are other straight allies who have come along that journey. But in the beginning, we had to gather amongst ourselves to push that forward. And that's where think, this idea that um, concern around DEI or things like that, well, that came out of a place where we were restricted from participating in other places in society. And so we had to come together to support each other. And that level of care for our own community is shifting because we see gay bars closing, we see community centers closing, and so that integration is good in the broader society. But as we recognize some of those things shifting away, here's an opportunity for organizations who really care about the LGBTQ community and want to make a difference, that they can reach out, build bridges, and welcome them in with open arms, where 60 years ago, that just didn't happen at all.
Yeah. I love your de Tocqueville reference. That's awesome.
Let's bring the
History.
history on. Yeah,
I'm a
history
history
lesson.
major. I wrote a whole paper on the tyranny of the majority. Love it. Which is one of his things. Uh, uh, it's yeah. I would just expand a little bit on, and I love that that your research is centered around the LGBTQ plus organizations, but does it the data that you were looking at and the strategies that you're analyzing and reinforcing in there, is it applicable to any other types of organizations? Is it portable? Kind of some of these concepts you talk about in this and it regardless of your mission uh, uh, and are there fundamentals that you're talking about that uh, are applicable to any organization out there in terms of donor motivation, engagement trends, et cetera?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it is applicable to all organizations, right? Because ultimately, if you think about it, so much of what nonprofits are trying to do is to build trust in the communities they're serving, to build trust with the donors who are committed to their mission. So
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of that has to do with one, having, the right systems in place, right? So obviously having a good database so that then you can then begin to think about, okay, when I'm out there having conversations with people, I can begin to segment my donors so that I can communicate with them the way they want to be communicated with.
Mm-hmm.
I think about as well, the survey that we did, and if I remember right, I think only 27% of the nonprofits that responded actually collected the data and actually used the data. And so if you think about that, that's barely what, one out of four nonprofits that were doing that. And then
Right.
there was a subset of that, and I forget what that number is, but it was less than 27%, I think, that actually collected the data but didn't use the data. Well, the question then becomes, well, why are you not using that data? If you're collecting it, do you not have
Right.
a database where you could actually put that in there and use it? Are you limited on resources, limited on capacity? You've got this really important, critical information that can help you grow and deepen these relationships with the donors. So ultimately, I mean, I think that, the data is key in showing, the donor values, the donor identity, sort of the life um, the life changes where the donor is in their giving behavior. So again, I think a lot of this comes down to segmentation and building that donor trust. So it's applicable no matter whether you are an LGBTQ nonprofit, a BIPOC focused nonprofit, a health nonprofit. It's applicable across, all nonprofits, especially as we struggle with um, funding cuts and
Mm-hmm.
and individual donors reducing giving, and relying heavily more on major donors. So we have to be very thoughtful and intentional in making sure that we are engaging the donors the way that they want to be engaged and building that trust.
Yeah. That that data, your comments about data are so accurate. I mean, I work with so many of our clients and they seem to have one of two issues. One is they're not collecting the data they need to really effectively execute their fundraising strategy, or vice versa. They are collecting a bunch of data too much and it's onerous on their end, and they don't even know why they're collecting it, or the data they are collecting doesn't align with their overall strategy at all, and the strategy should be driving the data, right? Should be driving what you want to collect and how you're going to use it. to drive that strategy. And I think a lot of times it's the opposite, or there's just inertia behind. I inherited this database from, 3 different people who've used it before me, and I'm just going to keep collecting that data because that's what they did, instead of being intentional, like you just said, about thinking through that strategy. What are my donor journeys? What are my segments? Who am I trying to speak to? Why? And how do I communicate it with them effectively to execute this fundraising strategy, right? And I think the data should be driven by that, which I think sometimes it's the opposite, right? But
Yeah. Well, and to your point, I mean, too often, again, it could be limited capacity and resources, who knows? But I can't tell you how many organizations that I worked at in the development departments where you would check out people's donors' profiles, and because you'd had a coffee meeting with someone, there would be no information there. So you had no idea in terms of the conversation that was had prior to you. So it's like starting all over again. And yeah, so I mean, who knows why the data is not being put in there, but there's a number of reasons.
yeah.
You know, just in your report, it highlights that many nonprofits only occasionally represent the LGBTQ individuals in their marketing. You caution against symbolic gestures like the rainbow branding only during Pride Month. What is the risk of that kind of inconsistency, and what's authentic and what should we be doing year round in inclusion? What does that actually look like in practice, in real practice?
David, I can give you a perfect example of what it looks like year round. And part of this has to do with a lot of shifts that took place last year. Nashville Pride in Nashville, Tennessee, faced a $250,000 deficit because of corporations who pulled out of funding that entity. Fortunately, the community came together. They raised the money so that we can continue to have that next year. And so, yes, acknowledge Pride Month in June. Yes, give to your local organizations who are making a difference in this space, but don't pull back because you're nervous or you're scared, because what it does to the community is it signals, well, we only cared about this for one reason, maybe optics. Maybe it was because we felt like we had to do it. And that's where the authenticity of the effort comes into play. And I want to give you a good example from another organization in Tennessee, which is the Memphis Brooks Museum of Art. They have a program called the Pride Collective, and they have 4 other groups or 3 other groups that are specific to different segments: a Black collective, a local collective, and there's another one I can't think of. But what they do is they focus on year-round programming for LGBT art, not just one time a year, multiple times a year, to bring donors who care about this. And again, it's open doors. You can be LGBT, you can be a straight ally, you can be anything and be part of this group. But there's a recognition that year round we care about this. Leadership has prioritized it, and you show up with authenticity, not just one time a year, not just with a check because you think it's appropriate or kind or everybody else in town's doing it, but because you actually want to support the community in the long term. And it really comes down to, is leadership bought in? Do you have authenticity in the way that you're approaching this community or any other community? Because people will see that shift and they'll back away and they won't either support that nonprofit, or in the case of some of those businesses that backed out of Pride in Nashville, they may not be shopping at those places anymore. So put your money where your mouth is
Yeah.
and be authentic, not just one time a year, but all year.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. That is a perfect segue into my next question, which is, authentically engaging with the community. Brian and I did a webinar a few weeks ago, and he had so many great insights into that piece of it. But I was kind of curious to expand that a little further. Like, how important is an organization's board and leadership when it comes to authentically engaging with the LGBTQ plus community and donors, and what happens when that leadership does not reflect the community that they're trying to engage with?
Yeah. Representation matters, right?
All right.
So, you know, I know myself, and I mean, I know that, donors look for evidence typically in the nonprofits that what communities they serve. Am I seeing myself reflected at your board level? Am I seeing myself reflected in the leadership level? Am I seeing myself reflected, to CF's point in the marketing materials outside of the month of
Mm,
June? Is it consistent or is it performative? Those things are noticed. And I think it was Candid that did a report,
mm,
where they were talking about really when you're looking at the LGBTQ plus community, oftentimes you see members of the community at the staff level, but not at the leadership level. And so there's a gap in that strategy, right? That who plans the strategy, because oftentimes leadership is responsible for strategy. And if we're not seen as a part of the leadership of the board, in helping to develop and define the strategy of a nonprofit, we're not seeing ourselves in there, then the question becomes, are we really supporting the right organization? I may believe in your mission, but I'm not seeing myself reflected within your structure. So I may
mm.
not support you any longer, or I may go to another organization that has a similar mission where I can see myself reflected.
And
Yeah.
Brian, let me just add on to that. It it comes down to really the peer to peer. Like
Mm,
if my peer isn't inside this organization, if someone who I don't consider a friend or a colleague, those are the folks that I'm going to give to. If I'm part of an organization, my role is to bring other people in. And so, those board members asking their peers, asking their colleagues. And if you just don't have somebody from that community in a leadership role, you're not going to be able to access their friends, their networks, and the people that care about them. Because yes, as much as we want to give to X organization, we're probably giving because our friend invited us to do it.
Good point.
It,
Yeah.
you know, in the report, it's a little bit of a shift, but it's the younger
mm,
LGBTQ plus donors tend to prioritize broader social justices in causes and give more spontaneously, while the older LGBTQ plus donors are more likely to use donor advised funds and serve on boards. How can nonprofits steward both generations effectively without using that one size fits all approach, which I think a lot of people do anyways, and they got to adjust that. But yeah, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I kind of harken back to an earlier question that we had. I mean, I think, systems in place is a part of that, right? So making sure you have good systems in place to be able to communicate the way that the donor wants to be communicated with. How are you segmenting your donors? Because as you mentioned, David, we know that the younger generation, they tend to be more inclined to give through mobile giving. They want to actually be hands-on in a nonprofit, helping to problem solve with things. They, as CF mentioned, oftentimes peer to peer. Hey, I made a donation at XYZ organization. They posted on their social media, and then you see their friends kind of jumping on the bandwagon and giving to that organization as well. Whereas, if you think about, as you said, the older generation, we're talking about sometimes there's a different sort of a giving structure or structured giving, donor advised funds. There's family foundations, that kind of thing. We also know that, the older generation is typically, oftentimes they're the ones that are serving on the boards or in advisory roles. So again, I think just sort of bringing it back, I think, having systems in place, a good database where you can actually capture that kind of information and communicate strategically to those different generations. So it isn't a one size fits all communication. And then
Right.
people are like, why did I get this email? This doesn't even pertain to me. And then you're starting to deteriorate that trust that nonprofit doesn't know who I am or what I'm interested in. So I don't know if I want to give anymore or volunteer there anymore.
Yeah.
You know, I can't tell you, oftentimes, not often, but sometimes, I'll get an appeal from a nonprofit in the mail that says Mr. and Mrs. Williams. And I'm thinking, there is no Mrs. Williams that lives in this household. There's a Mr. Williams and a Mr. Walter. So clearly you don't know who I am, so it sort of reminds me that it's so important that we have those systems in place, the right tools to be able
Definitely.
to communicate. I'll get off my soapbox.
No, I love it because I couldn't
It's
agree
a
with you more. Yeah,
it's a
it's so
good
important.
example.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I wanted to go back to you were talking about authenticity and diversity on board and staff and making sure there's representation to ensure that authenticity. And I think both of you have talked about this in the past that to authentically represent the LGBTQ plus community, you can't just show up in June, right? You can't just talk about it during Pride Month. There has to be a consistent message that do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I talk about with the folks I work with is, and somebody brought this up, and it's a non-LGBT organization. And
Yeah,
she was concerned about these folks who were critical of her work,
yeah,
who should, in essence, be supportive by the nature of the work that they do and the nature of the work of her nonprofit.
got it.
And I said, why are you spending your time focused on people who are not with you?
Hmm.
Lean into the people who are with you. And so, one of the things that we noted, we got a lot of anecdotal feedback in the survey last year. Somebody said, well, if we put a pride flag up, we may lose donations
Hmm.
Wow.
because some people just don't like gay people and
Wow.
they don't want to see that in the window or on an email. And you know what? If you are so against one group of people that you don't want to continue to feed kids, then maybe you need to go spend that money on a therapy session or something else like that, because what it's going to show is the realness of how you believe in the work that you do. Back to my earlier example, why burn the midnight oil to convince people who've already decided they don't believe in the way that you're conducting your work in that nonprofit with my one
Yeah.
client? Focus on the people who care, and the people who are on the sidelines really just looking for an excuse to say no
Yeah.
will walk away when we stand up for what we believe in.
Wow. Well said. Thank you, CF. All right.
You know, and this could be either both, or you could both answer it from your opinions. What is the long-term risk for nonprofits exactly that ignore the LGBTQ plus donor engagement trends, not just from a reputational, but from financial and strategically?
Yeah, I mean, so the long-term risks, monthly donors, major donors, legacy donors, volunteers, board members. I mean, the list goes on and on, right? So it's a matter of, we know that fundraising is moving in the direction of values aligning with the donor, with donor identity, with what else would I say? Segmentation, shared power. So, philanthropy is shifting in that direction. And if you have nonprofits that are choosing not to move forward with the direction that philanthropy is going in, those nonprofits are going to fall by the wayside, and they're going to fall further behind than where philanthropy is going. And I just think that that is going to create a much larger gap for those nonprofits because they're not keeping up with the direction that philanthropy is going on. And I say all that, but the survey that we did this time around, the second survey, it's interesting because there is sort of some of these testimonials that we saw coming out of the survey. You have some nonprofits that are, because of some of the policy changes that have been happening, some nonprofits are sort of stripping stuff from their website because they're trying to meet the the demands of what's happening today. Other nonprofits are standing their ground and they're saying, we're not changing anything on our website. This is who we are. This is who we've always been. And this is who we're going to continue to be, regardless of the situation. And to CF's point, people are either going to support that or they're not going to support that. And part of my concern is, the more we see nonprofits sort of not standing their ground and continuing to say, this is who we are, this is who we've always been and who we're going to be. Part of my concern is those nonprofits are going to probably end up losing some really committed donors who have been very invested in that organization. But now they're saying, well, wait a minute, you're not who I thought you were. You're changing what you're doing and what you're saying. And so that just concerns me a little bit based in the environment that we're in.
Yeah.
Let me go a little bit deeper. Another story. You think about the long-term risk. I was working in a community where there were two organizations that primarily serve the LGBTQ plus demographic, and one of them leaned in and one of them leaned away. And this was last year. One of them leaned away because they were concerned about how their federal grants could be impacted by the nature of their work. So they removed all acknowledgement to the work that they did with the LGBT community from their website.
Wow.
The other organization leaned in and raised and this organization that I was working with, they lost money, but they leaned in to their conviction, their authenticity, and raised an additional $550,000 as a result of money being taken away from them that was rightfully awarded many years ago. Because they knew their truth, they knew their authenticity, and they weren't willing to back down when it came to who they served, why they served that community, and really communicate with their constituents that we're here to stay and we're not going to shift how we do our work just because we're afraid of losing a little bit of money.
Yeah.
Good long-term thinking.
Yes, great points, actually. Yeah, leading into so going back to authenticity, and maybe those are the takeaways. But I'm going to ask this question anyway. If you could give our listeners one takeaway from this discussion that they can implement next week, for both you, Brian and CF, what would that one action that you recommend every organization take after listening to us today?
You want me to go? No, go ahead.
I am just a firm believer in authenticity. You have to breathe the mission day and night. You have to really own it. You have to have conviction around that mission. But what I'll say, not necessarily to organizations, because somebody that might be listening may not be in a place where they can make some big decisions, or maybe they're not in a leadership role, or maybe they're not on a board. But if they're an employee, or if they're a donor or a volunteer, start small and recognize where you are. Is it that there should be a little bit more visibility? Well, maybe do a little bit more outside of June. Show up at the Pride Chamber, for their events every month. And most major cities have an LGBTQ plus Pride Chamber. Go to those. Connect with people, and you can be an ally and you can go to those things. But for an organization that may not be ready to do it, there's somebody probably in that organization who's comfortable, who's willing, who's interested. If you're that employee's boss, let them go explore, let them go connect with folks so they can learn a little bit more. But don't feel like you have to solve all of it at once, come up with a completely new strategic plan that focuses on LGBT advocacy and activity. Start small, connect with people in the community, and acknowledge kind of where you are and how you can move the needle just a little bit, with the support of your peers and your leaders in your org.
Well, since CF stole what I was going to say, I'm a big believer. We talked a little bit about representation matters. So I'm a big believer in doing audits. So take a look at your fundraising, take a look at your database. Are you capturing the important information that you need to be capturing to be able to build trust with donors? Do an audit again at the senior level. Is there anybody that is representing my community at the senior level? Do you have anybody from the LGBTQ community on your board? Do you have anybody from that community leading a committee, like a development committee or marketing committee? So I'm a big believer in audits because then it allows you to take an honest assessment. Okay, this is where we are. And then from where we are today, to CF's point, what one or two things do we want to try to change over the next 6 months or year? Be realistic. Sometimes I think nonprofits strive to do everything all at once. And then, sometimes we just get burnt out and nothing gets done. So, like CF said, small steps, but I think an audit can be a great first step to be able to define where you are today, where you want to be in a specific amount of time.
That's awesome. All right. Thank you. Okay. I got one more question. I'm going to pass it to David. Okay. We talked a bit about what y'all do, and your ideas around fundraising and donor management. But I'm curious to know what's something that both of you, each of you, might surprise our audience to find out.
Now I got to tell them my secrets
I
now,
mean, you don't have to do
huh?
anything too revealing,
Okay.
And wait till my next question. So there you go.
It doesn't have to be personal, or it could be personal, whatever.
Yeah, I think that whenever somebody asks me this question, I am a huge map geek. Like and I'm in the millennial generation, so like I know that like maps for decor are a thing, but I'm gonna plot my route wherever I'm going in a map. I'm gonna look at all the buildings, and then I'm gonna go once I get there, then I'm gonna go back and look at the map and see it. So, if the Cartographers Association needs help fundraising, give me a call because I will geek out on your
Oh,
work.
that's funny. That's cool. A map geek. Love it.
Map geek through and through. I was just on the phone earlier today about a place I drove through on the way here, and I was like, I couldn't believe it. I had to look it up, and then I watched some videos about it. I mean, it was just
think
just
you
that
could be a
stuff.
comeback. Hey, CF, you could be a comeback for AAA.
Seriously, I mean, my dad would get those books, and I would like read
Yeah,
through them, and I'd get the maps, and he'd get all them, and I would just geek out on them. Yeah,
that's great.
easy.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
I was going to say it's true because when we have our virtual meetings to talk about, the presentation we're doing or whatnot, and we're talking about different places like where the farm is or whatever, he's over here on the side computer looking it up while he's talking to me. He's like, "Oh yeah, I see where it is over here, Southeast Kansas, blah 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 blah." So he is truly, truly what he says. Um, I think so. I'm a Sagittarian. I love adventure.
Me too.
One of Sagittarian or adventure?
Both.
Both. One of the things that has been on my bucket list since over 30, 40 years is I want to walk the Santiago Trail.
Oh, yeah.
And it is a 146-mile trek, but some people do it for exercise. Some people do it just to sort of reset their life. It's a spiritual pilgrimage. People do it for all different reasons, but there's a lot of different trails. But the one I want to do is it's across northern Spain. And so I would say that's where I geek out. I've got podcasts saved. I've got blogs saved on it so that when I do it, I know exactly the steps to do.
When I see
That's a
you tonight,
trek.
Brian, we're gonna look at the maps and we're gonna need to show
Yeah,
me
you need
where
a
you want to
map. That's
go
right.
so I can visualize it.
I appreciate that because I am not a map person.
I have looked into doing that. That is quite a hike, right? It's
Yeah,
multiple weeks, right?
it is. It's depending on how fast you go, it can take up to like 35 days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some it's more of a religious pilgrimage, is that right? Some is
Hmm.
just more of a challenge, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super
And
cool.
there's smaller trails, but I think there's probably like 15, 20 different trails all across Spain. But that
Yeah.
tends to be the most popular one that pilgrims or people take.
That's
Sounds
great. I
very, very
love,
cool.
love both of that stuff. That's awesome.
Oh,
So we're not quite finished, but we always like to finish our show by asking one question. What is something that we didn't ask each of you that you wish we had?
I, you know, I think relative to this topic, and I think this is where, especially for straight allies or folks who are not part of the community, and for even those, and I have met some folks, some gay men recently who weren't aware of the resources in your own community.
Mm.
So go just Google LGBT Community Center, LGBT Chamber. If you want to learn a little bit more, it doesn't take a lot to find organizations doing great work in your backyard, and you can easily show up for the programming. I would say, um, a good question would have been like, well, how can we start getting to know this community if we don't know it that well? There's a lot of resources and a lot of places that you can find with a simple Google search that would welcome you with open arms. And the straight allies are great. And I'll finish with just a quick story. We had an issue recently with a guest at an AFP event who was uncomfortable with LGBTQ content. That was really at the initial part of the meeting. And we discussed it. It was brought up, and somebody said it was a straight ally who stood up and said, "That's just not going to be okay if I'm around." And when it comes from a straight ally, it really just has
Mm.
a much more resonant effect, to acknowledge the importance and the care, for our LGBTQ plus peers, feeling safe, feeling supported, and feeling welcome. So if you're a straight ally and you're not sure where to look, just Google it. There's a place that you can find and go uh, get engaged with.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was going to say, for me, I mean, I think I'm an optimist. That's part of being a Sagittarian. We're eternally optimistic. So I think about hope and sort of I think the most inspiring part of what nonprofits do and can do is to really listen deeply to the community and to make more space for different voices throughout their organization, whether it's volunteers or committees or leadership roles. And I think by listening deeply and allowing more unique, diverse voices to be a part of your nonprofit, I think what that does is it makes nonprofits more human. It makes them more authentic and more real to the donor. And so I think that for me is so important.
yeah. Great points. And CFR, I've been to the LGBTQ Center in San Francisco multiple times. As a straight man, I totally agree with everything you mentioned there. They used
Good.
our
Did you have fun?
software. Yeah, well, yes, and I trained them on our software. They raised a bunch of money for a capital campaign with our solution. So, and now it's a much larger uh, organization than when I first used to go there. Yeah, but it's great. So glad you mentioned that.
And you have
Well,
a wonderful gay men's chorus there too. Go glad
Oh
to get
yes, and
support
they
them. Yeah,
they actually I don't know if they do anymore, but they use our software too. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, of
good.
well, and thank you for being an ally.
course. All right.
Brian and Sia, this was truly great. We're not finished, but we'll be right back after this.
We are a team that has had an enduring influence on the nonprofit industry for more than 3 decades. We pride ourselves on developing and delivering technology with a purpose, software born of a genuine understanding and passion for cause. We are relentlessly dedicated to our client success. We are with our clients for good. We are Arriva, tech with purpose, driven by cause. Arriva is the trusted advisor and market leader of fundraising, donor relationship management, and auction software and services. Exceed further, our evolutionary all-in-one digital fundraising and donor relationship management software is helping nonprofits worldwide further their mission, transform fundraising, and cultivate relationships with donors and constituents. Our Maestro Auction virtual, live, and silent auction software, text-to-bid, virtual and mobile bidding software, and text-to-fund, text-based donation software are helping nonprofits raise billions of dollars through thousands of virtual fundraising events, charity auctions, and galas. Visit Arriva.com and reach out today and see how Arriva can help your nonprofit organization go further.
Welcome back, everyone. All right, we're going to go into our next segment, Ask the Maestro. This question comes from Alex, and I'd be interested to hear both Brian and CF thoughts on this. And he says, we're an LGBTQ plus nonprofit, and a lot of our supporters are younger, incredibly engaged, but not always in a position to give significantly yet. How should we be thinking about building these relationships long term?
Yeah, I mean, so if I think about if they're younger, they're just starting out in their careers, so they may not have a lot of money to give at this point. But I think there's, if they're engaged already, there's plenty of opportunities to keep them engaged. And I think a part of that is having conversations with them. How do you want to be engaged with our organization? I'm a huge fan of having coffee meetings with volunteers and donors, because what that does for me, it allows me to understand who you are and what you want from the organization. And so that builds trust. It builds relationships. It deepens those relationships. And I think that, we know that, I forget what the numbers are, but, there's a generational shift when it comes to money that is happening now and will continue to happen. And so I think continuing to engage the younger generation, continuing to ask questions about how would you like to be involved with our organization is a great start.
Yeah, and I'll just continue on with that. I think it's important for those organizations. It took me a minute to sort of think about how I want to approach it. But the reality is the organization is going to have some goals. They need to know what their goals are, and then they need to figure out and start talking about those goals with those folks. If they want to deepen a relationship with somebody, you got to talk to them. And the thing I always think about individual giving and face-to-face solicitation, and that's really my background. And I'm always shocked when I talk to folks who don't spend time talking to their donors face-to-face. You're right, Brian. Go have some coffee. Go have a drink at the gay bar after work, wherever. But go talk to them about what the priorities of the organization are. I think I was talking to somebody earlier today with an organization where something similar happened to me. I sat down for coffee with a woman who had only made one gift to an organization, a leadership gift. And we sat down, we had coffee at a Starbucks. We're both crying about our connection to the mission. She asked me what's going on in the next couple of months. And then she asked me, well, how much would it cost to do it? 2 days later, a $20,000 check in my office with her sending me a thank you note for my time. Sometimes we just don't know how we can engage folks until we sit down and have a conversation with them. So talk to your donors, keep them close, keep them involved, and deepen that relationship.
Yes.
And if I can add just one more thing, coming from working with numerous small-sized nonprofits, I always try to keep in mind so many of them have limited capacity and limited resources. So while you may say have 100 younger donors who are engaged with your organization, obviously on top of everything else that you're responsible for, break that 100 down. Say, I'm going to meet with 5 a month. That's 1 every week, so that you are making progress. And so break that large goal down into small chunks to make it manageable for you, because I know everybody is so incredibly busy.
Those are great points. I mean, we could do a whole podcast just on generational giving. So I love that comment. There's a lot to unpack there, but also just you're never going to land large donations, right, from individuals without building those relationships. And I think we rely a little too much sometimes on emails and texts and things like that. But
Right.
it's like you said, I was just in the Cinch Saloon on Post Street in San Francisco, wonderful gay bar, had a great time. Absolutely. Meet there with your donors and have a conversation. There's nothing can replace that, right? That personal connection you can make face to face. So absolutely. Thank you both thank you both for being so generous with your time with us today. And thanks to our listeners. Please, for our listeners, make sure you submit your questions for our next segment of Ask the Maestro. And David, please finish us off.
Brian and CF, it was a real pleasure having you both with us today. And it was such a treat. It really was. And thank you so much for all of your insight and advice to our listeners. I just want to take a moment. I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us today. Make sure you subscribe to Driven by Cause. And while you're at it, don't leave us 4, but leave us 5-star rating, just like the Uber driver wants it. I also want to give you a thank you to our amazing sponsors, Arriva. And thank you all, our fantastic listeners. We hope you'll join us next time on Driven by Cause. Make it a great day. Thank you.